You know, Wes, I don't know about you, but I really enjoyed this episode, mainly because I identify with it so much, because I also, if I don't meditate once a night, end up having these really horny jazz dreams that I just...
It's a little insulting to call that.
It was like a borderline... It was...
Sexy detective novel.
It was one appearance of a little person away from being like a David Lynch film, I think. In like a black and white, someone holding up a burning ace of spades or something.
I know. It's truly strange, although I guess we're going to have to get into it, but I've
it's a really, how do I put this? It seems like a really white guy interpretation of what would make a woman horny.
Right.
If that makes sense.
Yeah.
Like it's like, oh, she just the jazz just overcame this repressed Vulcan and she can't handle it. It's like, okay, all right, keep it down. Keep it together, you 50-year-old man.
It kind of just brings it into the just the sense of like, it's just this sort of like cliche archetype, like if you pulled someone off the streets, like it's probably 1 out of 10 would be able to like even understand jazz enough to get like emotionally affected by it. So it's just strange that this Vulcan, and I think they've even gone into the fact that Vulcans have music and everything, and they sort of appreciate it. So it's just very strange, and it's honestly so strange that you think something else is going on.
I don't know if you knew this, but Berman and Braga actually get story-by credits on the movie La La Land, because that movie is a direct adaptation of this episode of Star Trek.
They just shaved the pointy ears down and went off with it. Let's take a break. We'll play a clip from the episode, and then we're going to come back and we're going to break down Fusion.
I spent 2 years at the Vulcan consulate on Earth, and 7 months on Enterprise.
That's a long time away from home. Living here has obviously affected you in ways that you don't realize.
You may be right. On occasion, I also drink chamomile tea.
Okay, so this is Fusion. It's the 17th episode of the first season, aired on February 27th, 2002. Teleplay goes to Phyllis Strong and Mike Sussman. Story credit goes to Rick Berman and Brandon Braga. Directed by Rob Hedden. In-universe date is unknown, but it's 2151. In this episode, the crew of the Enterprise meets a group of outcast Vulcans who embrace their own emotions, leading to trouble for T'Pol. Leading to trouble for a lot of us. You know what this episode reminded me of? It reminds me of Breaking the Ice in a lot of ways. Do you think that if we go back and we watch Breaking the Ice retroactively, it becomes a worse episode at this point? Because what I think is happening is that, and I'm going to I think I'm stealing Patron Neil's comment later on about this, but...
Hey, he signed the contract. As soon as you leave that comment, it becomes the property and original thoughts of the two of us.
Once he has a comment about basically like, why does the show feel so low energy? And I guess I would expand on that by just saying that like the show kind of in a lot of episodes, like Breaking the Ice, I think to a good degree, and this one to kind of a bad degree, it feels like it's moving along in like third gear. And when you expect to get onto the highway and go into fourth or fifth gear, it just never happens, and you just kind of keep coasting along at this sort of like medium pace, and then the episode ends and you get off the highway or whatever the analogy is at that point. It's just this one feels super low energy, like Breaking the Ice, except it feels like the topic needs to have more energy to it than Breaking the Ice did. But there's something like languid about the way that Enterprise is approaching these episodes. Everything feels very low key and slice of lifey in a way that I think some plot lines benefit from and some don't.
Yeah, I actually like this one more than Breaking the Ice.
Oh, really? Wow.
Yeah, because I feel like what this one did that what Breaking the Ice did that this one didn't do is Breaking the Ice kind of manufactured that problem that was just really tacked on with the ice is snapping and the legs are breaking and whatnot. This one, the thing that got me about this one is it was kind of like the kind of episode I've been talking about that I wanted, which is we're going to take the pieces of this concept and we're going to twist them and be like, okay, well, we've never seen this before. What would happen if X?
Right.
And so they do that in presenting a different kind of Vulcan to Archer and the crew. One who we haven't probably seen since, I guess, Star Trek V with Cybok and his crew there.
Right.
Vulcan Protestants, essentially, who are taking a different tack as far as the reading of this Vulcan gospel of the way to how to deal with your emotions. And I actually found that really interesting. And I didn't feel like it was... Nothing about it. It was very low key. It was very languid. I'm not debating that at all. But I thought the vignettes essentially that they were doing to explore this, I found a lot more satisfying than what they were doing in Breaking the Ice. And it didn't feel like it had any manufactured conflict. What ends up happening feels a lot more of a piece of what they're trying to do than what they did in Breaking the Ice. Like having one of these Vulcans essentially turn into a mind rapist, it's arguably even it's not, I guess it's not worse than that, but he's a lot more manipulative in his assault, using this perceived new way of thinking, this new correct way of thinking as a smokescreen to assault T'Pol.
Yeah.
And I found that really interesting. I found that scene, really harrowing. And I was also glad that they didn't make all of them that way. Like they weren't all secretly unable to control themselves.
Right.
It was just this guy who obviously had a problem with it. So it wasn't like, oh, here's the problem with their way of life is that nobody can control anything anymore. Like it wasn't that kind of thing. My only problem that I really had with it as it stands is I wish T'Pol was the one who got the better of the guy and not Archer.
Does Archer even get the better of the guy, really?
Well, he pulls the Chris Pine Captain Kirk thing where he just makes him angry and uses that to disarm him. And I was kind of I get why they did it with Archer, but in retrospect, I was kind of wishing that T'Pol had been the one to do that, so she could actually assert her agency and strength over this attacker.
Yeah.
Instead of having essentially being turned into a damsel in distress a little bit.
Yeah. Not really dissimilar to the way that she's been treated in general. I think that I think that I have more. I probably think this episode's worse than you do. I guess I don't know if you think that this is a great episode or anything, but I think that there's just a lot of. I think there's just a lot of strangeness continuing off of stuff that I have previously found strange. Like I know that you're less invested in like how the Vulcans are portrayed and everything like that, but you're starting to run into weird things here where. And this is not really a fault of Enterprise, but it's like the Romulans already exist in this series. There's an offshoot of Vulcans who sort of rejected the Surak teachings or whatever about logic. And
wait, the Vulcan who created the teachings, his name's Surak. Lofton?
Close enough. It was because Surak is actually named after the founder of the Vulcan religion. I think his name is Surak, something like that. But
that's why they're all so repressed and horny.
Basically, yeah, it's a good tie-in. They should have built something off of that. I think I'm just running into problems with. To me, this one feels most like the show is trying to resolve the problems that I've had with the Vulcans to this point, which is that they're kind of showing them to be unstable in a lot of ways, and that they it's almost as if their logic teachings are not really constraining what they are underneath is the thing. And I think I'd be fine with that. I just don't know if I really enjoy that storyline all that much at this point, where it feels like all the Vulcans are kind of just this like crumbling persona or facade who are holding back this sort of like crazed emotionality that all the characters would have if they didn't have these logic teachings. And I mean, the minor nitpick is just the Romulans. Like they should act more like, they would be more like Romulans. Why aren't these people considered Romulans and things like that? But I don't know. I guess I mostly just, I appreciate the effort. It just feels like I'm still not sure where Vulcans sit in this universe and where Enterprise thinks that they should be in terms of like their development and all that stuff. Because as I said previously in the other episodes, Archer and the other humans are surprised when Vulcans are emotional, right? Like they treat the Vulcans whenever they get emotional, which is literally every time that we see Vulcans, they're getting emotional in this show. Archer and the crew are always like, well, look at you losing your temper. I guess you're not really as Vulcan as you thought, which doesn't make any sense because I feel that the humans treating them this way implies that the humans think that the Vulcans are always ice cold about everything. But I've never seen an ice cold Vulcan in this series.
Yeah, it feels a little bit of a crutch for them to keep going back to that well. Of the over emotional Vulcan well, but at least this time I like that they draw a distinction between them, and actually present them as purposely extra over emotional as a counterpoint to T'Pol. And I think it's you're right. I'm less concerned with how they are positioned compared to the way they're positioned in all the other shows, because I do give this show a bit of leeway in terms of how they're treating them, just because they're trying to tell a new story.
Yeah.
So I give them some wiggle room as far as that stuff goes, and I appreciate it when they try and do something different with these guys. And it's tough because I think a lot of the preconceived notions of the Vulcans is that they are very cold. So it's probably half a crutch and half them not doing the research or caring enough to really figure out how they sit related to the rest of the series. But it doesn't bother me that much.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I would draw a conclusion about that, and it kind of fits the pacing of this episode, where I feel like this first season of Enterprise, from like the temporal Cold War to the way that the Vulcans are portrayed to the way that the ship sort of moves around and whether it can go back to Earth and stuff like that, I feel like the nuts and bolts of what they outlay for this series were not really well defined when they started writing it. Like they have an idea, like the whole idea is basically it's 100 years before TOS. Like, and that seems to be the amount of thought that went into things, because it just feels like a lot of episodes to me feel very much like the Cold War episode, Cold Front or whatever it's called, where they're introducing an idea, but they don't really feel like they have enough of anything to know about that to tell you anything about it. And I feel like the Vulcans are that way, where I would appreciate if they want to do the Vulcans different. I just feel that you have to set it up so that it's not conflicting with what I already know the Vulcans to be. And it's the same way with the Cold War thing. Like the Cold War thing is just they kind of mention the idea of a temporal Cold War, but they don't really know where to go with that after that. It's just the fact that bringing it up seems to be enough of a storyline for them. And I think that the Vulcans here are that problem to me, where since I can't really latch on to where the show thinks that they should be, I have a hard time judging the drama between the characters as to whether or not something is intentional or not intentional with their portrayal of things. Like everything could be an accident or it could be an intentional thing that they're doing with them. I don't know. I think that the pacing and the languidness of it ties into that, where you have these sort of like the trip in that Vulcan B-plot in this one where they want him to talk to his dying father. It just feels so strange mashed onto things, but at the same time it feels pleasant because they're such like slice of lifey small stories that are really interesting that they've never done. So I'm very conflicted about how I feel. I
think you might be overthinking it a little bit as far as the Vulcans go, but I mean it's all, you know, the personal stuff that you care about X, Y, and Z. But it just seems to me like that's the choice that they're making for this show, you know, as opposed to how this necessarily fits in with everything that's come before.
But it's, I think it's totally counterintuitive to what they are. It would be like the Klingons on Discovery are like peaceniks, sort of. Like there's like this, like, it's so it's so different from what you're supposed to expect. It's not as drastic as that because the Vulcans are still trying to like maintain some kind of logic thing here, but it's just the inconsistency of the writing where they're treating them like they're established Vulcans on another series, but they don't write them that way.
I see. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, honestly, it's hard for me to follow that stuff because I don't know if I could compare and contrast them if I had to. So.
Yeah. No, that's fair.
I'll take your word for it.
I mean, so explain to me what you think the Vulcans are in this series. Like what's going on with the Vulcans in general? How would you interpret what you've seen so far?
I am viewing them through the lens of the way that the humans are viewing them, which is overbearing and cold, essentially.
Are they struggling as a society to hold their emotions in check?
I don't get that sense.
Oh, because I do get that sense.
Oh, really?
Just because, it'd be one thing if it was just these Vulcans on the ship that were doing it, but T'Pol has shown the entire series that she's struggling with this stuff, I think. And that this one becomes explicit. She's like, if I don't do my superhero meditate in the chamber technology for 8 hours a day, like I basically become this like raging ball of emotions. And it's just never, I don't know. It's never really been portrayed that way to me. Like it's this kind of weakness that their society has. And because I'm viewing it much more as this is a society-wide thing because every Vulcan we've seen down from that ambassador who likes to yell at Archer all the time to T'Pol to these guys are having the same exact problem with controlling emotion.
Yeah. Well, no, I guess you're right. I guess I haven't really thought about that much, to be honest with you. I haven't really read it as the Vulcans as a people having trouble keeping their emotions in check. Because T'Pol is the only one who seems to really... she's the only one it really seems to come up with, and while the other ones are getting emotional, anytime that the humans call them out on it, I do read that as the humans just using whatever they can to try and get one over on them.
Oh, okay.
But it doesn't bother me that it's never bothered me that T'Pol is struggling with it because it's some people can struggle with it.
Yeah,
I don't know.
Yeah, I suppose so. I guess I'm just looking for more groundwork there or something.
Yeah,
it just seems
supposedly, according to the comments that I've seen left on our shows, they do explain why the Vulcans are different.
Right, but that kind of, I don't know if people think that they're disproving my point. To me, that proves my point. Is that the show realizes later on that they've done something that they haven't laid the groundwork for, and they need to explain why this is happening. Yeah.
Yeah, I can see. Yeah, definitely.
And it's not a huge problem. It's all sort of just the structure of things. Like I liked the Vulcans in this one. I liked seeing the emotional Vulcans who are kind of different and like to eat chicken marsala and stuff like that. And like that's all fun. And I like the sort of chubby Vulcan who works with Trip in the engineering and stuff. I think that that's all kind of like charming little things where it is showing this kind of extending of the olive branch between these two species, where the Vulcans are now starting to understand that a lot of things that they believe about humans are wrong, and humans are thinking that the Vulcans are not exactly the same. And I even like the sort of the setup here where Archer is so desperate to enjoy Vulcans that he gets along with, that he's willing to sort of look past the damage that T'Pol is taking. I think, honestly, my biggest problem with this one is that I would have liked to have seen them go in that direction, where Archer is so enamored with these Vulcans that T'Pol's sort of fear and worry about them is pushed aside to a degree that puts her into danger. Sure. And at that point, I think Archer learns a lesson by the end of it, because I think Archer's defense of T'Pol is both very good and very bad at the end in some way. Like, I'm really glad that they called out, and the Archer basically says something like no means no, which is good, I think, in this case. But he doesn't report that guy to the other Vulcans. He doesn't do anything about it. Yeah, it's not like he tells him to get the fuck off of his ship and he's going to tell his superior. He's just like, I don't think you should go to sickbay. Right. Don't see her again. It's very, and that's part of why I wish it was T'Pol that got the better of this guy, because it is very,
I don't know what the word for it is, but the way that Archer handles it feels very much like a dated way to handle this stuff.
It does. It feels like a 50s
setting.
dad reacting to someone who's raped their daughter and being like, I can't have this come out in the society, so just stay the fuck away from her. Yeah.
And the most troubling thing about that is, even at the time, it's not like this was from 1955. This is from 2002. It's not that long ago. It's not like this was not a known quantity, that this stuff was happening this way in real life. It's troubling that they actively wrote it that way and didn't see the opportunity or see that the right way to handle this would be Archer reacting in a much more aggressive manner.
Yeah, or it's I don't know if you can do this with the exact storyline that I've set up here, that T'Pol has some reason where she has to protect this Vulcan. Like, this getting out would be bad for them in general, and so T'Pol has to suffer this, and Archer is furious about it, but he knows that he can't do anything about it.
That's tough too.
It is tough. That feels like that's more of an adult drama situation, I think, which is maybe not what Star Trek is all about.
I think though, if you want to play it with that dark angle, it's tough too. I was gonna say, if you want to play that dark angle of it, I think what you do is you have T'Pol and or Archer tell the leader of the other Vulcan ship what happened, and then have that person brush it off under the rug.
Right.
You know what I mean? As a sort of boys will be boys kind of thing. Hey, everybody's got emotions, man. We're just dealing with that shit. Give them a break, that kind of thing. If you want to play that dark angle and see the even worse outcomes of what happens when people report this stuff sometimes, I think that would be the way to go. But having Archer take the W by just sort of, admonishing this guy a little bit and then saying, maybe you shouldn't go see her anymore. It's not as firm a stance against what happened as it could be.
Yeah, which is funny because Star Trek in the past has been criticized in other series when they always have a mind rape episode in every single episode. And
hey, they've had 2 in this one if you count what happened to Trip.
Oh, that's true. Yeah. Well, yeah, and that actually results in like a physical thing for him. But the other series don't. They always get criticized for not responding to it maybe strongly enough or effectively enough to like sort of have the other characters show that they understand what has happened to the Troy character, for instance.
Right.
And this one's different because Archer clearly understands what's happening. It's just such a strangely written scene, like the way that he lightly sets him up for it. He does that thing where the character's like, "Oh, how'd you sleep last night? How was that? Was that good?"
I thought that was hilarious because the way that he was acting, I thought he was going to do that thing where he's like, "Hey, could you hold this frame up in front of your face real quick and then punch him through the hole in the frame or something?" Like, I thought it was going to be more of a Bugs Bunny retribution scene or something.
Yeah,
or he secretly poisoned him or something.
So it builds off of that, and then it goes into what I also like about it is that Archer saying things like this to a emotional Vulcan are dangerous to him because the Vulcans are, canonically they're supposed to be stronger than humans, which they show by throwing him across the room here. And I don't think they lean into that either enough, which is that like this is the problem that Archer would have dealing with emotional Vulcans like this, is that they'll basically like break you if they think that you're wrong. And so you're stuck in this really weird middling section where Archer says his piece, he gets beat up, and then he just kicks the guy off and is like, "Don't come back here anymore." And I just feel it's like that's the low keyness of, I think that's the point where the story needs to shift into a higher gear, and it doesn't.
And also, depending on how you read the ending, it's when he goes and talks to T'Pol and he's like, "You do this every night?" And she's like, "Yeah." And he's like, "Now I understand why." I don't really know if that's the best thing to take from this whole thing. Is that it's like, yeah, you really need to keep your shit in check, otherwise you're gonna rape somebody. Again, it feels very 50s dad in that way, where it's almost putting the blame on T'Pol,
Yeah.
In this weird roundabout way that I feel like would have been easy to miss as they were writing it at the time.
Well, do you think that the lead up to T'Pol trying this stuff was done effectively, in terms of like, because I think what you're supposed to feel is that the character of the sleazy Vulcan is not overtly so. I think the actor actually kind of overplays him a little bit as a creep early on.
Yeah.
And I think that they kind of show their hand there, because I didn't really. It just goes back to my initial Vulcan thing. Like, I don't really think that I have a sense of T'Pol as to why T'Pol would feel that she wants to try this kind of thing. Like,
Sure.
I understand it on kind of a technical level that, as a Vulcan, she's interested in this kind of like offshoot hippie culture of Vulcans and be like, oh, maybe I'll try it and see what happens. But the fact that she hasn't not meditated would seem to me to show that she knows what the downside of it will be, So,
Well, I don't know, because I read T'Pol as slowly and semi-reluctantly becoming more humanized the more she spends on the ship. So, which is probably, they constantly bring up the fact that no other Vulcan has managed to last this long on a human ship. And I think it's because T'Pol is more open, reluctant, whether or not she's going to admit this, she's more open to the culture exchange than a lot of the other Vulcans have been, whether it's eating more food, drinking the tea instead of drinking the tea, but then being like, well, they don't make any Vulcan shit. Or any of the other things, bits and pieces that she's gotten along the way from the humans. So I see it less as, oh, she's open to this Vulcan hippie stuff, as much as these Vulcans are acting more like humans. So this could be a way for her to dip her toe into what it might be to act more human. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Where it's like it's not wholesale rejecting her culture. It's a roundabout way to kind of work her way into it. It's like when you grow up in a really strict church setting, and you end up going to this thing, and there's one band playing who's playing like Christian metal,
right?
And you're like, well, I mean, I'm not supposed to listen to heavy metal, but I can listen to this. And then 2 days later, you get corpse paint on, you get King Diamond tattooed across your chest. It's a very slippery slope. But my point is, it's like I kind of read a little bit more like that she's these Vulcans are a little bit more human, so she's kind of veering that way just to dip her toe in the water.
Right.
The fact that she gets unceremoniously slapped for doing so is troubling.
Well, yeah, but it's like, so I guess maybe that's the core problem with it, because I could see an episode where she meets a Vulcan group like this and she tries to dip her toe and she learns something about herself that is unsettling through this non-violent kind of ideology that these Vulcans have, right? The rape kind of comes out of nowhere and is just a punishment to her for trying something. And
Right.
I feel like in a more adult drama, like an HBO drama, you could have a storyline like that, but there's something more. There's more of like a lesson or a spine to the morality there about what that character would learn from that experience. And I feel like T'Pol here ends up kind of beaten down by it in the end.
Absolutely.
And it's not like there's any kind of like, oh, this'll like, I've learned a lesson here that makes me a better person. Even though I'm broken right now, I will come out of this better. It just feels like it's too aggressive of an outcome for that character for what they were trying to do originally.
Which is why I feel like another reason why I wish she had gotten the upper hand at the end, because you're right, the way this ends, she's very much beaten down, and the last you see of her is her very like is meditating incredibly intensely.
Yep.
As though she needs to like cleanse herself of the mistake that she made.
Right.
Which is absolutely not the case.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it's tough because while I do really like the episode and what they were trying to do, I think that element of it is very flawed.
Yeah, because I I would have been perfectly happy with just T'Pol tries to embrace this. She has those weird jazz hands flashbacks where she loses control a little bit, or the emotional. She's not, because she's been raised as this sort of like stock standard Vulcan way, which again is flying in the face of what I think the Vulcans are. But if, like, say if she was a traditional Vulcan and been raised that way, meeting this group to me has a bigger impact there, because it shows. It both shows you what's brewing underneath the Vulcans, and that there is a way that they could control it that the mainstream Vulcan society doesn't really understand at this point, because they don't teach it to people. And so you're left with this like much more Star Trek-y interesting thing about like what does Vulcan society say about these people? Like, they're clearly not doing anything bad. In my hypothetical example, they're not doing anything bad. But like, they can't handle it. What does that mean for T'Pol as a character? How's she going to grapple with these emotions if they're so chaotic when she, for the next 4 seasons of Enterprise, how's she going to deal with it? And instead you just have the far too easy resolution for it. And then it ends up with her in the dark room. And it's kind of, it's mostly upsetting. I don't think that they're very, in some ways, this is the most retrograde of the Star Trek shows. It's the most... Yeah,
at least as far as T'Pol is concerned, and their treatment of women, I would agree.
Yeah, I mean, the 60s Star Trek was zeitgeisty. Like, that's just in the air that when they were producing that show.
And even there, they had at least some concept of bucking that trend.
Yeah, right. They tried to push back on it when they can. Of course, all the women are wearing skirts and everything, and they're dependent on Kirk to come and punch out the guy to save them. But this is 50 years later, and in some ways, it feels like T'Pol is even more insulted than a lot of female characters on TOS were.
Yeah, I was actually, as you were talking, I was thinking about what the TOS version of this episode would have been. And it would totally be, they meet up with these Vulcans who are all like free love hippie Vulcans. They've all got long hair and shit, and they don't, they wear togas and stuff.
Yeah, no shirts. Just open chest.
And T'Pol ends up going full throttle in that direction, and she ends up kind of going crazy because of it, because of all the freedom.
Yeah.
And it turns into like a Naked Now kind of situation where she's like got too many emotions going on.
Yes.
And then Kirk is like, well, that's what happens when you're a woman. And you just need to be kissed really good.
Just a lot of offhand time of the month comments from Kirk in the chair.
It would be her like going crazy because of all the emotions, and then doing something really rash back on the ship, like steering into a star or something like that.
Yeah.
And then at the end, she goes back to normal and real. I don't think it comes out. I don't think the outcome is any better. I think both of these episodes still end with T'Pol coming out feeling bad about what she did, even though what she did is not actually bad.
Right.
And it's a really unfortunate way to handle this in the 21st century.
Yeah, I mean, the other big thing, it obviously just builds off of that, is T'Pol, even in... Go ahead.
Sorry, do you think like... But this is the fifth Star Trek show?
Yes. Right?
Fifth show, and they've already done 9 movies or something, 8 movies.
Yep.
One of which also involved a mind meld rape scene.
Yep.
Do you think when they were pitching this, someone in the room was like, "Hey, hi, do we really want to do this again? Because we don't have a great track record with this stuff. We already did it once earlier. We played it for laughs, and it's sort of like 50-50 whether or not we that was acceptable."
Yeah.
Do we really want to do this?
Well, I mean, do you think that the need to do it is just that as they were sort of coming up with this idea, you hit this point where if the rape doesn't happen, your script is extremely low energy. It's like you feel like you need something to happen here, because I actually think I would have appreciated more if the rape didn't happen and it was just this sort of like weird, quiet episode of Enterprise where this kind of like low-key thing happened. But, for a variety of reasons, like Enterprise doesn't have the character work necessary to really pull this off at this point, and T'Pol is not well developed or clarified at this point to really understand where she's coming from. You end up with this like note after the first draft of like, well, something has to happen to somebody in this. Like, you got to do something here, because otherwise this is just too flat. And I think it feels like that in a lot of ways. Although that Vulcan is just so creepy from the beginning that something is up with it. It's just it's ugly.
he doesn't successfully play it as though he's just being flirty. It all comes off as he's like grooming her.
Yes, yeah.
For what eventually happens.
Yeah.
And even so, even if that is on purpose, that's fine. Like, I don't actually mind that. I just think the way that it plays out ultimately leaves T'Pol with no agency in anything.
Yeah.
And it's a matter of her being able to, if you're gonna do that, you can't end the episode with her feeling bad about herself and Archer slapping the guy on the wrist. You even have the other guy like yelling about how it was actually T'Pol's fault, essentially. And Archer's like, yeah, well, who's to say whose fault it was? I mean, we all know how she dresses.
Yeah.
Sorry, I slipped into Batman character voice there for a second. That's not Archer is not from Brooklyn. But it's like that. It's that kind of thing where it's like, there's so many more appropriate ways you can handle this if you're going to do it, and you've chosen none of them.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, you can go ahead. I was going to move on to something else.
Well, I was just going to say, it is interesting though, given how widespread the teachings of this new group must have been eventually on Vulcan, because as of this show, the mind meld is a lost thing that no one's done for hundreds of years.
Yeah.
So apparently these guys catch on enough where the mind meld comes back,
which doesn't make any sense.
Popular culture, yeah.
Really, I am probably too concerned about that stuff, but I just...
Well, that one is kind of weird. Like, what does that add to the show to be like, mind meld? What's that?
Right.
From T'Pol. Like, why it'd be just as easy for him to be like, let's mind meld, and have her say, as someone who is concerned about this kind of stuff, have her say, I don't know. I've never done that. I've always been wary of what that does. Something like that.
Yeah, I mean,
you know what I mean?
The difficulty of mind melding with him would be like, I don't know if I want to experience emotion on the level that you do.
Sure,
I don't know if I'm right for that or something.
Yeah, she doesn't have to be ignorant of the practice.
Right.
I don't know. I don't know what that does other than just to have it be another. It's a first. It's a callback and a quote unquote first that makes absolutely zero sense.
Right. Yeah. It's a.
It would be like if T'Pol had normal ears, and these guys showed up and they were like, oh yes, we've started filing our ears down, which is a lost practice on Vulcan for the past 2. It's like, what?
Yeah, it's unnecessary. It's probably less big of a deal for me than the actual characterization, but it just felt like an unnecessary detail to stick in as a prequel item that you're going to deal with. It doesn't. Nothing about it screams to me that you have to be the emotional Vulcans to do that. It really makes sense to me that the Vulcans as a species would kind of do it with their meditation and everything like that. Let's see, anything else to really say about this one? Not too much. So what do you came off fairly positive in the opening. I don't know what you're going to give this one. You don't have to say it right now, but what would you say was the thing that stuck out to you that made you so positive on it early, considering the flaws that it has at the end?
I just really liked the concept. I thought it was a good let's play around with what this stuff means kind of episode. And I thought that they had the time that they spent with the different Vulcans from this ship and the things they explored, I found interesting. I thought the thing with them eating the food was fun. I thought the thing with the chubby guy there and his dad was interesting.
It's funny that we talked about that on the Radio Stars that we did earlier when we talked about No Son of Mine on the episode that's going to come out about like whether or not you need to apologize to your father. I didn't realize that this was coming up, so it was funny to me that it popped up right after we talked about that in this Star Trek episode. But I guess we should talk about the chubby Vulcan. Like, the storyline makes sense to me. I think it even down to like the lesson that you're supposed to learn from it kind of makes sense to me. It really feels jammed in there. In terms of the other plots, though, like, it's T'Pol dealing with the emotions and the sort of mental assault aspect. And then, well, this is also why it's good to talk to your father who hasn't talked to you in 11 years as well. Here's the other lesson that we're going to learn from it. I didn't mind those scenes. I thought they were charming, but it did strike me as a very strange difference in things that they were talking about.
Well, I think it's kind of a similar, without directly calling it. I'm actually kind of surprised they don't directly call it out, because this seems ripe for a two people talk about the situation scene that they do pretty well in Enterprise. But it is kind of a thing where since they have now embraced their emotions, part of that is holding a grudge or bitterness is an emotion that is to be had, and so in embracing their emotions, they're also kind of vulnerable to these sort of more negative things ruling their life.
Yeah.
And Trip, I guess ultimately Trip, helping this guy realize that there are some things that you need to kind of reconcile and deal with if you're going to really be a master of your emotions and whatnot. I think is an interesting way to go with it. They don't lean so far into that. Like I said, it's just sort of two scenes of Trip being like, "Hey, call your dad."
Yeah.
And the guy being like, "I don't know, my dad's kind of a jerk." He's like, "Hey, call him."
Yeah.
But I thought it was interesting. It's sort of an inversion of the Sarek and Spock thing, where they talk to each other, but you can tell from the way that they talk to each other that there is distance there,
Right.
as opposed to there actually being the son holding a grudge, which causes him to not want to talk to his father.
Right. Yeah.
I was surprised they didn't do a little more with the captain of the ship. It seemed like he and Archer kind of hit it off a little bit. It would have been interesting to spend some more time with him.
Yeah, he's only there up until the dinner scene, right? And then you don't see him again after that, I don't think.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting.
I think that's the only bit. But I like the idea. I thought it was, as if you're gonna have these low stakes episodes, I thought this was a pretty good one to have, because they're literally out there trying to map this nebula thing or whatever it is, which is very low stakes. It didn't involve the nebula starting to collapse and suck the ships in or some shit like that.
Yeah.
And needing someone with no only T'Pol can steer them out because she doesn't have to deal with being afraid or some bullshit like that. It was just them doing a star mission and then having these character interactions while they were doing it, and I found that very endearing, and I thought it was fun.
Yeah. No, I agree with you, I think. Let's take a break there, I guess, and we'll play a quote from the episode, and then we'll come back with final thoughts. So
I think, before we go, I think it's the more ideal version of what they were trying to do in the Sleeping Dogs episode with the Klingons, where you are learning about these Vulcans by interacting with them, as opposed to just walking through their ship and going, "Oh, that's gross.
Right.
They eat weird food."
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a good point. Let's play a clip in the episode. We'll take a break, and then we'll come back and we'll give our final thoughts and read some Patron thoughts about this one. It's called Fusion.
I need to go see her.
T'Pol's had enough of your help. Stay away from her.
She is in a crucial stage of her awakening. She needs guidance.
I told you it's over.
I think that's for her to decide.
Maybe I'm not making myself clear. Sick bay's off limits.
You're my way, Captain. You'd be wise to let me leave.
All right, everybody. Thank you very much for listening. Thank you for supporting the show. If you want to support the show, the best way to do that is patreon.com/thepensky-file. Couple dollars a month gets you extra stuff. And as always, our Captain Tier shout-outs happen right now. Special thank you goes to Alec DeWolf, Andrew Cholog, Ben Douglas, Bradley Killens, Captain Brazen, Cardinal Doomsday, Chris Tinsley, Christian Michaels, Christian Pouch, Darth Moss, David Beermore, David K, Dwayne Hackett, Eric Johnson, Eric Santuan, HH28, Jacob123, Jakey's Gamer, Joint Mango, Jordan Cooper, Kevin Lowry, Kevin Reyes, Kyle Barrett, Mad Courier 6, Matt Cutler, Matt Houston, Matt Ross, Mike Burnett, Mike Harris, Nathan Elliott, Neil Brennan, Nick Sergi, Russell Ellis, Samuel Custer, Grim Santos, Sean, Stephen Minton, Tarek Latif, and Tom Hiles, and Vault 13 Hero. Thank you very much, guys, for supporting the show. And that's it. Yeah, I think before
we're not doing video today because we got a packaged nose job deal.
Oh, that's
and we're both recovering at the same time. So
that is true. Yeah, there's no YouTube video today, but that'll be back. It's just one of these one-off things. Yeah, I feel like I feel like we talked about that episode, but I feel like I have a lot to say. However, I'm not really sure what to say about it anymore. I think it was an interesting episode, I guess. So let's go to Patreon comments. Maybe that'll spur something that I have to say about it.
Sure.
Matt Ross says, Fusion, how much crap did Arthur Archer take with him? Let me just turn this. I mean, besides a water polo ball, he took his grade school astronomy book. Sure. Then we meet the aesthetic rebel Vulcans, eating meat, having sort of emotions, and of course going after T'Pol in a date rape allegory, making these Vulcans even more despicable. The demystifying of the Vulcan's secretive nature is interesting as the group tells all. The father-son issue felt very after-school special. T'Pol's fever dream of the jazz club felt like she was going to run into Benny Russell or a prophet from DS9. Robert Pine as Taven, the crusty rebel Vulcan at the time, made me think he's a long way from Chips, and that as he's JJ's Kirk's dad, what a small world. Is he? Is that the same?
What?
Robert Pine as Taven, the crusty rebel Vulcan at the time, made me think he's a long way from Chips. Was one of these actors in Chips, I guess? I don't know. I missed it if it was.
I don't know.
Otherwise, the acting on T'Pol's...
What year are we in? This is 2020.
Otherwise, the acting on T'Pol's discomfort is disturbing, which is the center part of the story. I do recall that this caused a conundrum among fans by making mind melds a fringe, crazy belief. Archer's very fatherly admonishment of Talaris felt oddly delivered. Overall, the story felt strained, and I kept waiting for a school special announcement throughout this. Next one. Oops, where's the... Oh, it's up there. There it is. Poindexter G says, I'm fine with showing the origins of things Trek, but having mind melds be a thing only done by an outcast group seems a bit much, especially when it's only being promoted by Creepy McRapey. Getting mind raped is a Deanna Troi plotline. We don't need T'Pol falling into the same trope. A Latte Librarian says, there's so much to unpack in this episode that I won't even try. Why do women only make up a third of the crew? Only 2 regular female cast members, less than a third, by the way, and one of them gets mind raped in the first season. 1 out of 5 for making me angry. Yeah,
you know, I think the difference between this and maybe, I can't remember exactly how it happens with Troy. Are they referencing Nemesis, or does it happen in the show as well?
It happens in the show as well.
It does.
Yep.
T'Pol seemed more. Again, this is why it bothers me that she doesn't end up with the win here at the end. Is that she seems actively fighting against it. Obviously, what he did is awful. But the way that she reacts to it in the moment is a little bit more assertive than I think generally they write the women in these shows, in these situations.
You're saying T'Pol is more assertive in this?
Yes, yeah. And so to have her then shrink into the background is really unfortunate. But at the time as it was happening, I thought of her. I mean, I still do think she's a pretty strong character, but she seems like more of a strong. In that moment, she seems like more of a stronger character to be the one who eventually pushes through and gets the revenge is a bad word to use, but you know what I mean.
Yeah,
it's just interesting. Yeah, and it's, I don't know. I think there's a way you can tell this story if you really feel the need to tell this story, where T'Pol doesn't end up being solely a victim. But yeah, they didn't do it that way.
Yeah, and it's for a third of the crew thing, I don't mind details like that because I think that hints at a kind of proto-Federation humanity that the show would have. Like, what's the ratio of female astronauts to male astronauts at this point? I would guess it's probably a fairly high majority for men, would be my assumption. And I don't mind that. Like, I just feel that...
Well, the rest of that original line was a third of the crew are female, but we have no Italians.
What's a Polak doing here? Is that what he says in Prisoner? A Czech. What would a Czech be doing here?
What would a Czech be doing here?
I don't mind the crew breakdown, but agreed with you about everything Clay said about the T'Pol scene is strange in this. It's very like the Deanna Troi episode 1 ends pretty much the same, where Troy is getting assaulted, and the way that it's solved is Worf walks in and punches the guy. So Troy really has no defense of herself the entire time. Yeah,
that's... Yeah, if you're gonna walk out onto the thin ice of any sort of a sexual assault episode, you really need to rethink whether or not it needs to end with a man physically punching someone else as a way to rectify the situation.
Yeah,
that's not really the way to handle this stuff.
It's strange. Like it's strange that that's always the theme of it. It's just you would
Yeah.
think that.
Well, I mean, you're writing episodes about women getting sexually or mentally sexually assaulted, but a bunch of guys are writing these things.
Yeah.
You know, there's. I'm not saying it's impossible for a man to empathize to the point where they could effectively write this kind of story, but it seems like it's probably a little bit more difficult.
Yeah. It's just it's so strange because they obviously know the narrative stakes, because whenever you have an episode that like a crewman is infected by an alien or something, like that crewman is never just sort of shuffled off to the side after that. The episode usually involves them getting back at the other person in some way. So it's very
well. The one with Trip ends with him being like an integral part of whatever the end of the story is that I can't remember.
Yeah.
You know, he doesn't just fall to the background because he's got labor pains or something.
Right.
While Archer figures everything out and then pats him on the head and says, "It's okay, Trip. You didn't do anything wrong."
Yeah.
It's really insulting that they do this stuff all the time.
Yeah, it's very strange. It's just so repetitive and strange. Captain Brazen says, "Oof, mind meld connections as an allegory for rape. What a fuck. Remember, kids, consent is sexy. This prequel-natured storytelling about the Vulcan mind meld flies
Not as sexy as Duke Ellington."
The Duke. The prequel-natured storytelling.
I'm sorry. I just can't get over the fact that like all of T'Pol's Vulcan training is almost shattered by the fact that she heard like Charlie Mingus for the first time.
Yeah,
or
she
Charles Mingus for the first time.
Snuck out of her Vulcan dorm room and went down to the seedy side of town and listened to some.
I think it's Charlie Parker. Is Mingus's first name Charles too? Yeah. I can't remember.
It's just that I can't. There's a Seinfeld episode it reminds me of, but I won't go into it right now.
I was thinking, I was like, how great would it be as the mind meld scene was happening before it turned dark, and he's like, just let go, let your emotions come through. I was thinking, how great would it be if she lets go, and it's expressed in like the most awkward thing possible, like she starts dancing like Elaine from Seinfeld or something, and it's like, okay. Maybe keep that bottled up. I don't know. Maybe it's for the best.
I'm going to go mind meld over here. Prequel nature storytelling about the Vulcan mind meld flies into the uncomfortable box for me. I wish the writers hadn't thrown T'Pol into the mind violation camp like Troy. Sure, it's a tense scene, but it's nothing compared to Spock forcing an interrogative mind meld on Valeris in front of everyone in Star Trek VI, The Undiscovered Country. However, seeing Vulcans exploring their emotions while finding a balance with logic is fascinating. This subclass of Vulcans is borderline Romulan in temperament, with Solaris in particular being deceitful and manipulating T'Pol. Meditation is super important to Vulcans, otherwise they'll dream of that sweet, sweet archaic music known as jazz. Cue the Duke, baby. The B-plot with Kov and Trip is okay, with Kov clearing up misconceptions about humans, but otherwise a lame message in your Saturday morning cartoon special. 3 Robert Pine cameos out of 5. So it is Robert Pine. Whoever Robert Pine is, people are recognizing him at this point.
Mm-hmm. Like I would even have taken the guy trying to mind assault T'Pol, but T'Pol has a more forceful will than he does, and she turns it back on him or something.
Right.
You know, like that scene in Force Awakens where he tries to pull the information out of Rey, and then Rey like turns the tables on him and like breaks his brain briefly.
Yeah.
Something like that.
Stephen Minton says, I have mixed feelings when it comes to this one. Every attempt to portray one of the Star Trek races as a diverse people and not a monoculture is a win in my book. However, for example, I always found it mildly annoying that the Klingons are portrayed as warriors only. I always wanted to know how the Klingons do science, engineering, music, sports, education, economics. What I definitely did not want to know is how they do rape, but sadly, this is an example. This is exactly how this episode
Well, I think we can all assume how the Klingons do rape.
Sadly, that is exactly how this episode chooses to expand our knowledge of the Vulcans. And there's another thing that is starting to bug me. Captain Archer seems increasingly determined to remake T'Pol in his own image, just make her just a little bit more human, pressuring T'Pol into doing things she is uncomfortable with while simply assuming that these will be good for her. Yes, the episode makes it kind of clear that Archer made a big mistake this time, but the lesson is learned at such a high cost that it damages Archer quite substantially. Taken together with the fact that T'Pol again remains a passive agent while Archer is in the role of father, gallant knight, takes care of the abusive boyfriend, this episode makes me unhappier the longer I think about it. A low 2 out of 5.
That reminds me, I can't remember exactly what he says, but there is a line that sort of stood out as weird to me that Archer says. Something like that, where he makes reference to T'Pol in some sort of manner that made it seem like he's trying to actively change her or something. I can't remember exactly what it was. Maybe I'm making it up. I don't know. But yeah. I remember there being a scene where he says something where I was like, oh, that's kind of weird and creepy for him to say.
Yeah. Just the character work on Enterprise still has a long way to go, I think. Neil Brennan says, Fusion, in space, no one can hear you play horny jazz, but seriously, another episode built around men creepily desiring T'Pol. This is some weird shit now, like when an uncle keeps telling you how attractive his daughter's friends are over Christmas dinner in front of his daughter. Thank God a man was there to stand up for Stinky. Why does this show feel so lacking in energy? I find myself noticing the white noise background sound effects more than any other Trek show. 2 turned-on trumpet solos out of 5. And then the final comment is...
That was a great comment that we legally own.
That's right. Trademark. Darth Mosk with the final comment. Fusion. T'Pol's dream sequence flashback literally felt like an SNL sketch. Did anyone else comically spit out their beer and look at the glass only to realize that was only my second sip, so this must be actually happening? Also, how the fuck is mind meld some forgotten restricted section ritual that only Vulcan Joe Rogan practices? It's primal. This is what frustrates me about the prequels. It feels like this is stupidly and unnecessarily retconning the mind meld unless I'm forgetting something from an episode. What is up with all these men regretting not talking to women before puberty? But real talk, it was very refreshing to see Archer stick up and defend T'Pol. Way to go, bro. I guess.
Did you see that meme that somebody put up on the Discord of Gul Dukat in the Joe Rogan set?
Yes, yeah.
Talking about how 3 million deaths on Bajor actually isn't really that many.
Yeah, over the course of the 50-year
50
occupation,
years,
3 million deaths is actually not all that bad.
That was dead on. That was really good.
That's it. Thank you very much, patrons, for leaving your thoughts about Fusion, which is an interesting episode. Clay, what are you going to give this one on a scale of 1 to 5?
It's tough because while I do really like the concept, I do think the back half of it is unfortunately problematic. And I think it's easy to say that about a lot of stuff that was from the past and kind of write it off. But I do think that at this point in time, the writers at this point in time, honestly, at any point in time, the writers should know better than to handle their female characters getting assaulted in the way that they chose to do it. Yeah, I want to give it a 3, but I think that stuff at the end is so bad that I need to give it a 2.
Yeah, interesting. I would agree with the caveat that, like, even if you're not going to learn anything on some sort of like gender politics level, you would think that writers at this point would just learn that the narrative isn't satisfying that way. Like you kind of have to flip it back around on people, or like have that be the main character and not just sidetrack your female character with this kind of like assault sequence, because it was T'Pol's episode up until that point, and then Archer has to step in for some reason. It feels unnecessary. I'm going to I guess I'll give it a 2 as well. It's weird. It's a high 2 for me. Just because it is so interesting early on with what they wanted to do, but it is just another thing of not really. It just sometimes a lot of these episodes feel a little bit rudderless to me. It's like the show just doesn't know what it wants to talk about with these things, which we talked about in the previous episode with the Berman and Braga type of outlook on stories. And this one really feels that way. It's just like it doesn't know what it wants to take the Vulcans in what direction. It doesn't know what this means for T'Pol. It doesn't really have a good grasp on any of that stuff.
It kind of feels like, I can't remember where I heard this, but I heard someone once say that you don't find out what your story is about until the end of the first draft. Yeah. And then you go back and you rewrite it knowing what your story is about. This feels like they kind of got to the end of their first draft and just never went back to reshape it. Yeah. Because it does, I know what you mean by rudderless, because like there are some cool ideas in it and stuff, but it doesn't feel like it's really all driving towards anything. It's just a bunch of stuff that happens that's kind of like, that'd be kind of cool. What about this? What about this? And then they kind of, it's not it doesn't feel like that they had the time or took the time to reshape it into what it means as a piece.
Right. Yeah. To find the storyline that sticks out the most for you, and then sort of build everything around that in some way.
Yeah.
All right. 2s for both of us. Although it was more interesting too than some of the other 2s that we've had to this point. And I'm all for fleshing out the Vulcans so that I have a better sense of what the Vulcans are at this point. But honestly, to me, the problem with the series so far is I think that the character definitions are off still. Like, I still don't really have a good grasp on what T'Pol thinks about things and like what her sort of driving goal is. I understand she's slowly becoming more human, and it's the humanizing quality of living with all these humans on the ship and everything. But it feels like it's accidentally happening to her, in a way that's like, she's just kind of like osmosisly becoming more human, and she doesn't really have any thoughts about what that means for her. And I think that's kind of a letdown for that character in particular.
Yeah, it would be nice if she addresses that eventually. I think that would be interesting.
She has to, right? She has to talk about this, yeah.
Because I mean, it's like it's kind of like a inverse of the Data thing, where Data is striving to become more human, and you know that that's his goal. Whereas I don't know. I guess you could argue that T'Pol's thing is that she isn't striving to be more human, but she is just learning new culture by osmosis, which I don't think is a bad story.
No, but I think
happens,
I think that it would be much more interesting if she was resistant to that happening, but she doesn't seem to care really. She's just like,
right. Yeah. She's drinking tea and eating human food, but she's not really. It's just what she does now.
Right. She still rolls her eyes at the humans every time they say stuff, and then just eats their food. And it's like, for as well-defined as Phlox is and what he wants out of it, I think that you should have the opposite reaction from T'Pol, which is that she's very hesitant to do this because that would destroy what she thinks she is at that point.
Right, yeah. And I think this was an episode where they could have gotten into that, but they chose to
to go a different direction with it.
Yeah.
All right, guys, thank you very much for listening. Hope you enjoyed the content. You can find all the links down below at thepenskyfile.com/links. Otherwise, patreon.com/thepenskyfile is the best way to support the show. Much appreciated. Clay, do you have anything you want to say?
Badass Podcast is back. This was
yesterday.
Like Friday
it would
show,
be.
Right?
It would
yesterday?
be if it comes out tomorrow. It's yesterday. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's a new episode, first episode of season 3, which is the 2-parter with the debut of Batgirl. And next week is a new Rotten Horror Picture Show where we are covering Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
Oh, nice. There you go. And then this Friday or tomorrow, there's a new Radio Star Murders. That show is coming back. If you guys
look at all this content we got coming out.
I know, it's unbelievable. That'll be a YouTube only show at this point going forward, so you can check it out on YouTube if you're.
Our goal is to have so much stuff out that you tell your friends, I don't listen to them anymore. They have too much stuff. I don't have time. I don't have time to listen to it.
It was overwhelmed.
That is the mark of a successful podcast network. It's when you have one show you listen to, and it's like, I really would like to listen to the other ones. I just don't have any time.
We want to be the DVR of podcasting, which is it fills up and you give up on watching the show at that point.
I want your phone to tell you you've run out of space because you subscribe to all of our shows, but you haven't listened to them, but they still download onto your phone and just sit there taking up room.
That's goals, podcasting goals. All right, guys, thanks very much. The Radio Star is back tomorrow. Yesterday was a badass, and then Rotten Horror is next week, and that'll be a kind of, except for the Star Trek shows, all the other shows are every other week, I think, at this point going forward. So you just have to find them when they come out, and that's it. Support the show at patreon.com/thepenskyfile. We are done. Thank you very much. We'll see you next time.